We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
We've got some breaking news just into our newsroom. Phoenix police have identified the woman found dead near a canal off 28th Street in Oak.
Of the most interesting developments in the Nancy Guthrie investigation did not come from a new piece of forensic evidence. It did not come from a surveillance video. It did not come from law enforcement. Instead, it came from a statement released by the people closest to Nancy: Savannah Guthrie, Annie Guthrie, Camron Guthrie, and Tommaso Cioni. At first glance, the statement appears straightforward. Families of missing loved ones often release public messages. They ask for help. They encourage tips. They thank investigators. They keep public attention focused on the case. There is nothing unusual about that. When you slow down and examine what was said, and equally important, what was not said, several details begin to stand out. Those details do not prove anything. They do not identify a suspect, and they certainly do not tell us what happened to Nancy. They do raise questions about how the family sees the investigation today compared to how they viewed it during the first days after Nancy disappeared. And that difference may be more important than many people realize. When Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home, the public narrative formed quickly. The initial focus centered on the possibility of an abduction. That theory gained even more attention after communications reportedly demanding money began to surface. The public was introduced to the possibility that someone had taken Nancy and wanted payment in exchange for her return. Naturally, the family responded. Public appeals were made. A substantial reward was announced. Family members spoke to the media. The goal was simple: bring Nancy home. At that stage, nearly every public statement revolved around hope. Hope that Nancy was alive. Hope that someone would come forward. That the communications represented a path toward finding her. Months later, the tone feels different. Not necessarily hopeless. Noticeably different. That detail matters because language often reflects priorities. When families speak publicly during active investigations, every word is usually chosen carefully, particularly in high-profile cases, particularly when national media attention is involved. Now consider the timing of this most recent statement. Investigators have spent months examining evidence. The public has spent months debating theories. Former law enforcement officials have offered opinions. Journalists have examined timelines. Independent researchers have reviewed publicly available information. And throughout that period, one reality has remained unchanged. Nancy has not been found. That fact alone changes the way families communicate. As time passes, the focus often shifts from rescue to answers, from finding someone to understanding what happened to them. And some observers believe that shift may be visible within the language of the statement itself, not because the family explicitly says it, but because of what receives emphasis. The statement reportedly focuses heavily on continuing the search for truth, continuing cooperation with investigators, continuing efforts to generate leads. Those themes appear repeatedly. That sounds expected, but something doesn't fit. Because when you compare recent statements with some of the earliest public comments surrounding the case, there appears to be a subtle change in emphasis. Early discussions frequently centered on the possibility that Nancy could be returned safely. Recent discussions appear more focused on accountability and answers. That transition is understandable. Families facing long-term missing person cases eventually confront difficult realities. The longer a case remains unresolved, the more attention shifts toward understanding events rather than anticipating immediate recovery. Now, consider another detail. The statement comes from multiple family members speaking with one voice. That is significant. Public unity matters during major investigations. Family members present a consistent message. Investigators often view that as beneficial. It reduces confusion, reduces conflicting narratives, and it helps maintain focus on obtaining information. At least publicly, the statement presents that united front. Savannah, Annie, Camron, Tommaso, all appearing aligned behind the same objective, finding answers about Nancy. That may seem like a small detail. In many high-profile investigations, public disagreements eventually emerge. Different family members develop different theories. different priorities, different frustrations. That does not appear to be what we are seeing here. Instead, the statement projects consistency, raises another question. What conversations have taken place behind the scenes over the past several months? Families involved in major investigations often receive information that never reaches the public. They meet with detectives. They receive updates. They ask questions. They discuss developments that investigators may not yet be prepared to disclose. The public rarely sees those conversations, which means statements released by families sometimes become one of the only windows into how they view the investigation's progress. And that is why wording matters. Now consider what the statement reportedly does not do. It does not appear to endorse any specific theory. It does not appear to identify any person of interest. It does not attempt to solve the case publicly. Instead, it keeps attention directed toward investigators and the ongoing search for information. That approach is often intentional. Families know speculation can quickly overwhelm facts. Once public accusations begin, the conversation frequently shifts away from evidence. The focus becomes personalities rather than proof. The statement appears careful to avoid that trap. And yet, despite that caution, questions remain. Because this investigation continues to produce contradictions. The porch footage, the reported ransom communications, the timeline, the unanswered questions surrounding access to Nancy's home. None of those issues disappear simply because time has passed. If anything, they become more significant. Every month without answers places greater pressure on investigators to connect those pieces. And every public statement inevitably gets viewed through that lens. People are no longer simply asking where Nancy is. They are asking what investigators have learned. What evidence has been ruled out? What evidence remains under examination? Whether the answers are closer today than they were 6 months ago. The statement does not answer those questions directly. Perhaps that is not its purpose. Perhaps its purpose is simpler: to remind the public that behind every theory, every headline, and every debate, there is still a family searching for answers, a family that continues waiting, a family that continues hoping someone knows something, and a family that continues urging anyone with information to come forward. Because despite everything that has happened since Nancy disappeared, the fact remains unchanged. Someone knows exactly what happened during those hours after Nancy returned home. The question investigators are still trying to answer is whether that person will eventually decide to talk. One of the challenges in understanding the latest statement from Savannah, Annie, Camron, Tommaso is separating what the family knows from what the public knows. Those are not always the same thing. In high-profile investigations, law enforcement often shares information privately with immediate family members while withholding that same information from the public. The reason is simple. Investigators do not want details released that could compromise future interviews, contaminate witness testimony, reveal information only a perpetrator would know. Because of that, family statements often exist in a strange space. They may contain subtle clues about the state of an investigation without ever explicitly discussing evidence. And that appears to be one reason people have been paying such close attention to this latest message. The statement arrives at a time when public interest in the case remains remarkably high. Months have passed since Nancy Guthrie disappeared. National media coverage continues. Online communities continue analyzing developments. Former investigators continue offering opinions. The central mystery remains unresolved. That creates a difficult environment for any family. Every public appearance is examined. Every interview is scrutinized. Every sentence becomes part of a larger conversation. Now consider the way the family has approached public communication throughout this case. From the beginning, they have consistently encouraged cooperation with law enforcement. That theme appears repeatedly. The latest statement continues that pattern. On its face, that may not seem particularly significant. Most families support the investigation. Most families encourage tips. Most families ask the public for help. But that detail matters because it reflects confidence in a process that has also faced criticism. Several commentators and former law enforcement officials have publicly questioned aspects of the investigation. Questions have been raised about evidence handling. Questions have been raised about public communication. Questions have been raised about decisions made during the early stages of the case. Those criticisms have generated headlines. The family's public position remains largely focused on supporting investigative efforts. That contrast is interesting, because while public debate often centers on disagreements, the family's messaging appears centered on cooperation. That may tell us something about what they believe is happening behind the scenes. Then something else becomes apparent. The statement does not appear designed to persuade. It appears designed to maintain attention. There is a difference. Persuasion attempts to convince people of a particular conclusion. Attention attempts to keep people engaged with an unresolved issue. Latest message seems much closer to the second category. There are no dramatic claims, no major revelations, no public accusations. Instead, is a consistent focus on continuing the search for information. That approach is often seen in investigations where families believe the right piece of information may still be out there. A witness who has remained silent. A person who noticed something unusual. Someone who dismissed an observation months ago but now realizes its importance. Investigators frequently solve cases through those kinds of delayed realizations, which raises another question. Type of information are investigators still hoping to receive? The public does not know. We can look at the unanswered questions that continue surrounding the case. The identity of the individual captured on the porch. The reported ransom communications. The sequence of events during the night Nancy disappeared. The source of information contained within certain messages, and perhaps most importantly, the events that occurred after Nancy arrived home that evening. Each of those areas remains incomplete. Each of them contains gaps. And somewhere within those gaps may be the answer investigators are seeking. Now consider the emotional aspect of the statement. The thing that stands out is restraint. Families experiencing grief often respond in different ways. Some become highly emotional during public appearances. Others become intensely focused on facts. Others alternate between the two. The latest statement appears measured, careful, deliberate. That does not mean emotions are absent. Quite the opposite. In many cases, restraint itself reflects emotion, particularly when families have spent months living under extraordinary circumstances. Every interview, every news story, every online discussion, all of it becomes part of daily life. Maintaining composure under those conditions is not easy, and yet the statement appears committed to keeping attention where the family wants it, on Nancy. Not on speculation, not on controversy, not on public disputes, on Nancy. That detail matters because major investigations often drift away from the victim over time. People become fascinated by theories. They become fascinated by suspects. They become fascinated by procedural mistakes. The victim gradually moves to the background. The statement appears to resist that shift. It repeatedly redirects attention back toward the person at the center of the case. And perhaps that is one reason the message has resonated with so many followers of the investigation. Because beneath every discussion about evidence lies a much simpler reality. An 84-year-old woman disappeared from her home. Her family still does not have answers, and investigators are still searching for them. But something doesn't fit. Because while the statement projects unity and patience, the investigation itself continues to generate uncertainty. Questions remain about evidence. Questions remain about timelines. Questions remain about information that has entered the public sphere through media reports and independent analysis. Those questions have not gone away. If anything, they have grown louder, which creates a difficult balance for the family. Support the investigation. Encourage public awareness. Avoid feeding speculation. Continue searching for answers, all while living with uncertainty themselves. That is not an easy position to occupy, and perhaps that is the most revealing aspect of the statement. What it says about the evidence, not what it says about potential theories, but what it says about endurance. Because months after Nancy disappeared, the message remains remarkably consistent. Keep looking. Keep asking questions. Keep sharing information. Keep searching for answers. And until investigators can explain exactly what happened. After Nancy returned home that evening, those answers remain just out of reach. The latest statement reminds us of that reality, not by offering conclusions, by emphasizing that the search itself is far from over. As the Nancy Guthrie investigation continues, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. The case now exists in two different worlds. There is the investigation taking place behind closed doors. There is the investigation taking place in public. The first involves detectives, forensic analysts, digital evidence specialists, and prosecutors reviewing information that most people will never see. The second involves journalists, former investigators, independent researchers, and members of the public trying to understand what happened using only the limited information available to them. Two worlds occasionally overlap, but they are not the same, and that distinction becomes important when examining the recent statement from Savannah, Annie, Camron, and Tommaso, because the statement appears less focused on theories and more focused on something else entirely: patience. At this stage of the case, patience may be one of the most difficult things being asked of everyone involved. The public wants answers. The media wants developments. Online communities want updates. And families want resolution. Unfortunately, investigations do not always move at the speed people hope they will. Some of the most significant breakthroughs in criminal cases happen months, or even years after the event itself. A witness remembers something previously overlooked. A forensic test produces new information. A digital trail leads investigators in a new direction. A conversation takes place that never would have happened during the first weeks of an investigation. History is filled with examples of cases that appeared stalled until a single detail shifted everything. Detail matters because many people assume a lack of public updates means a lack of progress. Investigators often say the opposite is true. The busiest periods of an investigation are frequently the quietest periods publicly. Information is gathered. Interviews are conducted. Evidence is reviewed. Experts are consulted. And very little of it reaches the news, which raises another question. Does law enforcement know today that they did not know during the first week of Nancy's disappearance? The public does not have that answer. The family may not have that answer either. But investigators almost certainly possess more information today than they did when the case first began. Challenge is determining which pieces of information matter most. Now consider how unusual it is for a case to maintain public attention for this length of time. Most missing person investigations fade from national discussion within weeks. Nancy's case has not. Part of that is because of the porch footage. Part of it is because of the unanswered questions. And part of it is because the circumstances surrounding her disappearance remain difficult to explain. People are naturally drawn to mysteries, especially mysteries involving contradictions, and this case contains many of them. An unidentified person on a porch, reported ransom communications, questions surrounding timelines, questions surrounding access, questions surrounding knowledge. Each development seems to answer one question while creating another. That is one reason the family's statement carries significance, because it resolves those contradictions, but because it reminds everyone that the purpose of the investigation is not to win debates. Purpose is to discover the truth. Sometimes that gets lost. Cases become stories. Stories become theories. Theories become arguments. Meanwhile, the actual objective remains unchanged. Find out what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Everything else is secondary. Consider the position the family finds themselves in today. Months have passed since Nancy disappeared. Every major holiday, every family gathering, every milestone. Each one occurs in the shadow of uncertainty. That is often the hardest aspect of a missing person case. There is no clear ending, no explanation, no opportunity to fully process what happened, just questions. The recent statement appears to reflect that reality, not through dramatic language, not through emotional appeals, but through persistence. The message remains remarkably consistent. Keep searching, keep paying attention, keep sharing information. Because somewhere, someone may hold a piece of information that changes everything. Investigators often refer to this as the missing piece. one detail that suddenly makes the larger picture understandable. Most major cases eventually have one. Sometimes it arrives from a forensic laboratory. Sometimes it arrives through a witness. Sometimes it comes from an unexpected source entirely. The difficulty is knowing where to look, and that is why investigators rarely stop revisiting old evidence. Old evidence has a habit of revealing new meaning. A statement that seemed unimportant becomes important. A timeline becomes clearer. Contradiction becomes explainable. What once appeared disconnected suddenly fits together. The public rarely sees that process happen. Usually they only see the result, an arrest, a breakthrough, an announcement. What they do not see are the months spent trying to reach that point. As we look at the latest statement from Savannah, Annie, Camron, and Tommaso, what perhaps the most important takeaway is not what was said, is what remains unsaid. The statement does not claim to know what happened. The statement does not present conclusions. The statement does not attempt to solve the case. Instead, it acknowledges a reality everyone involved continues to face. The investigation is still active. The questions still exist. The search for answers continues. And until those answers arrive, uncertainty remains part of the story. For now, the public continues to examine evidence. Journalists continue asking questions. Investigators continue reviewing information. And Nancy Guthrie's family continues, waiting for the day they finally learn what happened after she returned home that evening. That day may come tomorrow. It may come months from now. It may arrive from a source nobody currently expects. History suggests that secrets rarely remain hidden forever. Eventually, evidence speaks. Eventually, someone talks. Eventually, truth has a way of finding its way into the light. Until then, Nancy Guthrie remains at the center of one of the most closely followed investigations in the country. And the questions that existed on the first day of this case continue to exist today. What happened to Nancy? Who knows the answer? And how much longer will it take before that answer is finally revealed? If you've been following this case, leave a comment below with the detail you believe investigators should focus on most. And if you want updates on major developments as they happen, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future coverage of the Nancy Guthrie investigation.